Review of House 1, House 2, and The Horror Show, which sounds weird that I'll be grouping three movies together like that, but I'll explain it as I go along. Actually, I'll explain it right now. The House series is a very strange series to begin with. It's a horror, it's a comedy, it's a little bit of both, okay? The first one was made with William Katt, the second one was made with Ari Gross, and that one is not a true sequel, as there's nothing connecting the two films other than the fact that it's basically a house, weird shit is happening, but they were basically a series of films, not a connected story. Until you get to House 4. I haven't seen House 4 yet, but so the reason why I have House 1, House 2, and a movie called The Horror Show lumped in one review is because there is no House 3. I know that sounds weird, but if you look up the movie's House, you'll see House, House 2, the second story, and House 4, the repossession, and you gotta ask yourself, where the fuck was House 3? I'll get to it. It's a lingering mystery, but I did solve it, and I will get to it. The first House movie, I remember watching as a kid, and I remember watching the film and thinking it was pretty cool. It was, had some creepy moments to it, without a doubt, some weird and strange shit going on in the film. I didn't remember much about it. I remember William Katt was in it. It's kind of a haunted house thing, monsters, creatures, things like that. I remember it being a little weird, in terms of it being a little scattered. And in rewatching the original House, it's actually not a bad film. And I actually enjoyed House 2 as well. Although House 2 really was completely just raked over the coals as being such a horrible film. And maybe in some respects it is. I mean, but if you go into it understanding that both of these films are not going to be as serious as like Poltergeist or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, they're not going to be as serious as that, and you realize that this is supposed to be funny, then you're pretty good. So the original House actually worked out pretty well. It's actually, in some ways, in some respects, it's a little slapshot, a little poorly constructed. The fact that, well, there is a basic story of William Katt moving back into a house where his aunt had committed suicide, and he inherited the house, and his son many years ago had disappeared and has been lost all these years, and he's a down on his luck writer who has also been divorced as well. His wife has found success, and obviously he's found some success, but he's stuck in those moments. He's also a Vietnam veteran as well. So he's kind of stuck in those moments of having to, where's my son? And it's a heartbreaking situation when you think about it. But basically, he's moved back in there on the concept of he's going to start writing another book again, and he wants to research it. And of course, weird shit happens in the house. Now, some of it is comically bad. I mean, comically bad in terms of the monsters or the creatures or the things that happen to him. And that's on purpose, which is fine. But some of it is just so scattered and so random. And while it all does sort of tie in at the end as to where his son was, what the end of the story was, what the beginning of the story, what the middle of the story was, it does all sort of tie in. It does all seem very random and almost time fillerish. Like a neighbor dropping her kid off for him, or not even dropping, like completely pawning her kid off on him to watch, and the kid running around the house, and the kid being taken by some of these creatures, and him having so a lot of it feels like filler time. And if you've ever watched the Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode, The Day Time Ended, which really has almost no plot to it, just a bunch of concepts tossed in, that's what House feels like. It feels like there's a very thin plot and a lot of concepts to fill time. That doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. I mean, it is an enjoyable film. You do kind of sit around seeing things in it that you're just like, wow, that's really silly, but it's fun and enjoyable. And also, besides William Catt, George Wendt is in it as well. So it's fun to just see George Wendt of Cheers fame walk into every scene and just yell, "Norm!" So maybe the joke is a little tiring after a while, but still funny. So House 2 is a completely separate story. It's a completely different house. It's a completely different cast. It's a little more over the top than the first one in terms of comedy. There's a caterpillar dog. There's a great-great-great-grandfather dug up out of a grave that's a zombie. There's a pterodactyl, a Mayan woman who's being sacrificed, and they saved her. And overall, it's a little more silly and a little more ridiculous. Not that it made it a bad film. I mean, it actually was a pretty decent story, and maybe tied itself in a little bit better wise in terms. Better wise, is that a word? A little bit better in terms of being less filler material, less concept-y. It mainly revolves around this crystal skull that keeps Gramps alive, and he was buried with it, and he was able to stay alive as a zombie for 70 years. So, but there's still a lot of fun to be had in that, and of course different time periods kind of break in to try and steal this skull, like a caveman and people from the Old West and Mayans. So it's a little out there. It's probably not as horror as it is comedy, but it still has its moments, and it's actually still pretty funny, I have to admit. Both movies I enjoyed. I really enjoyed going back and looking at those movies again. They were a lot of fun, and I don't necessarily think I saw that fun when I was little. I saw them more as a horror film, and because of which, when I saw them originally, I didn't like the second one that much because it wasn't scary. But they are funny though, and that. Looking back as an adult, I can actually say I've enjoyed House 1 and House 2 for what they are, a horror/comedy. So let me get to House 3, which is the big mystery of the series. House 3, or the horror show as it's called. Basically, they made a movie and they realized that they completely cut the comedy portion of this film out. There was no comedy in making of this movie. It's a very serious, very dramatic, very dark story, okay? About a cop and a serial killer and his family. So you could clearly see there were elements of what was once a house film, which is what the horror show was originally made as. It was originally made as House 3. It was meant to be a sequel, or a new chapter in the franchise. But I guess due to the serious tone of the movie and due to the poor performance of House 2, at some point in time the decision was made to change it from horror comedy to straight out horror thriller, I guess. Because there's nothing funny in House 3 at all. At all. It's a complete reversal of... It is not funny in any way, shape, or form. And they may have went too far in that direction this time, as House 2 went maybe too far in the term of campiness. House 3, the horror show, probably went too far, too deep into not being funny. Because, frankly, at this point, when you've set up two movies that are horror comedies, that's the tone of the franchise. It's not a bad film. It's okay. Lance Henriksen stars in it, which Lance is pretty good in most anything you see him in. So, the problem with the film is, aside from being a little boring, which is not horribly boring, but have you ever seen the movie Shocker by Wes Craven? Which is another total shitfest of a film. Not one of Wes's finest works. It's almost identical to the film Shocker in certain aspects. It's basically a cop after a serial killer who kills people with a meat cleaver. They eventually catch him, they put him in the electric chair, yet he's not quite dead. He comes back as like an electrical ghost in the machine, I guess you would call it. which is essentially the same plot of the movie Shocker. So this time he comes back to take revenge on his family, and the concept is eventually the killer had been building up a tolerance to electricity, which sounds a little weird, so that when they did electrocute him, he was able to transition from one state of life into another and take his revenge. So the concept of the movie is they have to put that electricity back into him to make him come alive again, and then he would kill him in real life with like a bullet. It kind of runs as being a little dull, to be honest with you. It does. It's not a good film overall. I mean, Shocker wasn't a good film. A ripoff of Shocker is not going to be a good film either. But there you have it. For better or for worse, there is no House 3. There isn't. Take your pick. I did not find House 4 online available to watch. As I understand it, William Katt reprises his role from the first movie. But if I ever get a chance and I find it online to watch for free, because I ain't paying for that shit, I'll give you a review of House 4, The Repossession. But there you go. House 1, 2, 3. Or The Horror Show.